Awesome. Hi, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm Olivia Hernandez. I am interning for Balance now. It's great to meet you, Damion.
Great to meet you in person. I know we've chatted a bit online, so
Definitely, yeah. It's great to finally meet you, put a face, well, more of a face to the picture. So,
definitely.
yeah, so I just wanted to get a little bit into it, and just want to ask you first, kind of what made you choose this career path? I know you work in social media, you've worked at Warner Brothers. Just kind of what made you get into it from the beginning?
Oh yeah, it's it's funny. I don't think I've told this story in a while. I didn't start off in media. I actually started off in science, and that was actually kind of a thing. My dad was like, "You're black. You have to. Everyone's going to expect you to be in media, right?" And he's like, "You don't want to be that guy. You want to be the smart guy." And so I was always out to like prove people that I was a smart guy. And then I eventually was like, I know I'm the smart guy. I don't have to prove it. Like, why do I have to prove it to people, right? And so
Right.
I worked in science for a while and did a year of med school. And in med school, I just really didn't like how people were living their lives. They weren't. They were just like all medicine all the time, and nobody cared about whether the doctors were burned out. It was like, well, I had to do it, so you have to. And so I was sitting there and trying to decide what to do for a career and how to do something that still had like numbers and data in it because to be honest, I like that. It's fun, but something that was creative. And luckily at the lab I was working at, they're like, hey, you're a young guy. Do you know how to build a website? And I lied. I was like, yeah, sure, I do. And then I stayed until 3 o'clock in the morning reading like everything I could on the internet about building websites. And so I built their website and then realized that I really loved that. And so I moved into marketing and really focused on data research. And was like, well, if I'm going to do anything for my career, the first time I did something that I was trying to prove that I was smart and kind of living out someone else's dream, I wanted to do something that fit me. And so I literally, it's so cheesy. I sat down and I put a piece of paper in front of myself and wrote down like, what are the things you like to do? um, and I was like, well, I really like movies and I really like technology. I really like toys. And then I go, well, and I like clothes too. And so I'm like, I'll work in any of those industries and they all need data of some sort. And so I
Right.
started doing research and data there, but then that was still pretty early on in the time of Facebook. My last year in school, Facebook had just launched and was spreading to other universities. And so we were kind of my friends and I were all playing on it, and I realized that there's going to be something really big on like these social media things. So I just really went all in and started playing with them. And like when Instagram first came out, I was just all over it. I didn't even have an iPhone at the time, and I went to go get one just so that I could learn Instagram and figure it out. And lo and behold, pretty early on when I was working at NBC Universal, they started looking at how digital media was performing and how YouTube was performing, and suddenly everyone was looking at me saying, "Hey, you kid, you know stuff about this. Can you help us?" And then a career was born. And at the time, the idea of I wasn't even a social media manager. My roles have always been around strategy and sales. So I've always looked at how can I use what I learn in social media to understand how people behave and what they want, and to get to know people beyond my circle. And so, yeah, that's what happened. And now I'm still in it.
That's awesome. Yeah, so you've really been there at the forefront and seen it evolve through all
Yeah,
these.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. When it was like well, it's still like the Wild West a little bit, but now there's business is built around Facebook, whereas before that was inconceivable.
Right. That's awesome. And then just kind of along those lines, you kind of touched on it, but like, what's the one of the biggest takeaways? I heard you say like I just jumped into it, so like the hustle, the need to just go do it, put yourself out there. But it's like one of the bigger takeaways that you had in the beginnings of your career when you were still trying to figure it out, like you said, just choosing it for yourself instead of other people.
I think for me the biggest takeaway was like just learn it, just do it, right? I didn't know how to build a website the first time I did it, and then I just got a book and just stumbled my way through it, right? You're not going to be great when you first start, but if you just learn it and keep trying, you'll get better. And so that's always been my takeaway. There are times where I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I'll try. And honestly, that's been the difference sometimes between me getting a project or a job versus someone else is I just say, well, I don't know how to do it, but I will try. And then I'll actually, you have to be thoughtful about it, but I'll at least put a context around it and be very intentional about what I do. Yeah, that's been the biggest thing, because if you don't try, then you'll never actually do it. So you have to at least do it or start, right? You can't just want to do it.
Right, exactly. And that's definitely, I've even learned that in my own like brief experience with throughout college. I like try. Um, I like podcasting, was not a fan of it, and then I tried, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I love it. Um, but then, kind of more to the main part of this discussion, um, I read on your LinkedIn and other parts. How did you get involved in making the media and entertainment industry to try to amplify less diverse voices? How did you kind of get involved in that? What kind of sparked that? Because I know not right away, sometimes you have the ability to do those type of things in the position you are in.
Yeah, well, I think for me, it's a couple of things. One, I mean, clearly I'm a black guy, so by default, I was born into that to some extent. But the other piece was during my career, I never wanted to work in diversity, because every time I saw people working there, I saw that they were pigeonholed, and would tell them, "Oh, well, you don't know how to do this. You only know diversity stuff," right? And that was really frustrating, because if anything, that person probably is better at what you're doing than anyone else, because they've had the practice of honing and understanding a single market over and over and over again, so that you know what it takes to do that. And now you just apply that to any other group or any other audience or consumer that you want to look at. But I didn't want to be pigeonholed, so I made sure that I branched out of my comfort zone, but I didn't ever want to really ignore the fact or lose the fact that the way that my career goes, or the way that my career was growing, wasn't the same as other people. Like, I didn't have the luxury of failing up. Like, there were times when I've been in a position and I've literally done the job of like my boss, or I've had a boss leave or an entire department disappear, and I take on the work of it. And not only do I take it on, but then I make it more efficient, and I've grown the department and actually even made money where the company wasn't making money before, and then told, well, we don't know if you're qualified for this, right? And so after going through that multiple times, I realized one of the things was that it was a perception issue. It wasn't that I wasn't qualified, because I was clearly already doing it. The people who would get the job were like, well, so and so hadn't had a promotion for a really long time, and they're really nice, and they deserve it. Whereas I was doing it and didn't deserve it.
Right. Kind of back.
And yeah, and then on top of that, I was always asked about my opinions from media through the lens of research, or how can this work, or what does the audience think. And every time, well, not every time, but a lot of times, regardless of what I would say or what I would show from the audience, I would see a lot of times that, okay, that's great, but we're not going to do that. Or, hey, you know what? We have this thing for this video or this movie or whatever we think will be really great for Black people. Would you mind doing a test and figuring out what that was? Or sometimes I would get we have it for Latino people because you speak Spanish, right? And I was like, but I'm not Latino. But they're like, yeah, you're close enough, right? And that kind of thing, where I was like, that just seems kind of rude and not very accurate at all, right? And
Right.
so with that, I realized that the people who were making the decisions didn't really have any connection to the people whose lives they were impacting or whose stories they were telling.
Right.
In so much as like, why am I looking at a screen and every time I see a Black person, they're the sidekick, they're the criminal, or like it's always through the lens of them being Black and not through the lens of them being a person. Or why is it that the only time there's an Asian character is when they're a comedic relief, or they're really weak, or they're like, it's never, or they're the villain, right? The sneaky villain. And so it's never again, like, this is a person, and being Asian is one small facet of their lives. It's like, we have to see them through this facet, and it's the only one that they can exist within. And so I wanted to change that paradigm, because just from being a kid, even, it would always frustrate me. Like, why can't I just be a superhero and not be the Black superhero? And it was even to the point where, like, you've seen it. I mean, Black Panthers did a really great job, but every superhero had to have the title Black on it. So you would know, like, I can see that. I don't need you to tell me that this is a Black person as a superhero, right? And
Correct.
so through all of my other experiences, I realized that the one thing I could do was influence through the data and the info that I had. But slowly but surely, I realized that I could also do something else, especially with social media and the advent of the internet. I could just do it myself. And so the internet really has democratized things in a way such that Now the people who are telling stories don't have to work for a studio. They don't have to be, millionaires, and they don't have to be related to somebody famous. And they can still tell a story, and it can spread and do well and have just as much influence, even though it may have never seen a movie theater or a TV screen.
Right. Through social media. Awesome. Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely have experienced that in a different way, just being on the journalism side of things. You see it in different perspectives, reporting even, like not asking the community what they think and just asking
Hmm.
people. It's really important to do that. What do you think are some ways that we could change that in long term? Changing the perspective of just asking certain people because they're close enough or because, you know, that's all they have. How do we change that?
It's funny. I've been doing a research study with a collective lately, and it's really great. It's a bunch of people who are from all different like experiences, ages, ethnicities, and it's been really great because it forces us all to think about things differently and to consider where we have blind spots. And it's sometimes being put in that position where you don't have a majority, where you can't get consensus, where you really realize where your blind spots are. Um, and what I realize comes with that is a willingness to be humble and admit to yourself that you don't know everything. And so I think, especially as institutions and companies and organizations, one of the things that culture-wise we have to move away from is this idea that our leaders or we know everything. We know what's best for the consumer. We know what's going to work. To some extent, you may have an intuition, you may have seen those things, but the one thing that people are leaving off the table is it may have worked because there's no other option, not because it's what people really want.
Right.
And so it's really so simple as just asking people, and not treating people like a monolith. Not like, don't take the one, like, oh, you're the black guy, tell us what black people want. I'm not every black person. Like, I can't represent all of us, right? And it's understanding that the same way that any average white guy is not considered to be the same as the other, right? Everyone else is an individual. And so it's understanding the complexities and the nuances of those groups that you're looking at, those underrepresented groups, and taking time to make that consideration a part of your process. So don't make it like, oh, multicultural stuff is expensive. Multicultural is no longer a little niche thing. Like, it's pretty soon it's going to be the majority of the country. So you can't say mainstream and then leave out the people who are really influencing the mainstream. Um, I think once you make it a part of the process and what you do versus making it a special thing that happens on the side, the more effective we'll become at actually really understanding and talking to people. And right now it still feels like it's, okay, we got to do this, and then we have to do the multicultural version of it, instead of let's just talk to everyone and actually represent everyone. And sometimes you have to overrepresent a group that traditionally hasn't had visibility. And then once you do that, you'll start to get insights and understanding of your audience and consumers and the people you're trying to reach in a way that you didn't before.
Right.
And I think you start to engage with people differently, and you start to remember that these are people and not a number, not like an X% of, it's a person, right? And so that's a slow shift for a lot of people to make, because we're so used to, I want to move fast and just do what I'm going to do, and we have this process. But I think we're slowly making our way there.
Yeah, I completely agree with asking more people. It's just really important to do and just highlighting the voices that aren't usually heard. And then my next question was just kind of, I saw you were doing professional confession, and also could you kind of dive into that and tell us a little bit about that and kind of what you hope to gain from it?
Yeah, so professional confession actually was an idea that I came up with. So it's the same collective I've been working with. It's called the Multicultural Insights Collective, and we've been doing a lot of research we have some pretty big brands that are working with us, and we're doing research on diversity and how to understand it. And our first project is really around the language of diversity and how it's evolving very quickly, such that words that meant one thing one day are now a different thing today, and no one really knows, and there are new concepts and terms flying at us all the time. And what we see is a lot of people just kind of shut down and don't want to deal with it, or the opposite, where a lot of people feel threatened or like they're being attacked. And so if people are afraid or being attacked, or even we had someone on our panel who was like, I shouldn't ask this question. I shouldn't even be seen on screen. He's like, I'm white. I was like, so everybody needs to be a part of this. Like, we wouldn't have you on this team if we didn't think that you had something valuable to contribute. Like, we all
Right.
have to be a part of this solution. And so, but I realized that there's a lot of shame or unwillingness for people to have those conversations sometimes that are a little bit hard or awkward. And I wanted to figure out, well, how can I set up a way for us to have those conversations without people being afraid or ashamed? And so I was talking to a friend and we were like, hey, what if you could anonymously have that conversation like with a psychiatrist or a counselor? It's like, oh, no, wait, it's like a radio show. Someone can call in or they can send us a story or something to talk about their experience or their questions. And I then can sit down with someone who's way more skilled and more of an expert than I am and talk about it. And what's a practical solution that someone can implement right now versus like the other thing is a lot of people talk about diversity or talk about these things, but not how to do something about it. And that doesn't get us anywhere. And so I wanted to find people who had experience and actually knew like, what can I start doing today, even if it's a small thing to start moving us towards being more inclusive and understanding when it comes to diversity and representation and equity and such. And so I pitched it to my business partner. I was like, what do you think about this? And his reaction told me everything. Oh my God, that's brilliant. And then we talked to our sales guy and he did a little digging and thought the same thing. So that was born. That's how we got to Professional Confession. So our third episode is coming up next week. I'm really excited though that we've had some really great guests, and it's actually I think I've learned a lot just from talking to the people who we've had on the show.
Great. I'll have to tune in. That's definitely something even I know people in my life who are older and are still trying to figure out certain terms and like don't know
Yeah,
who to ask, don't know, not even in a bad way per se, but just don't know what the new and upcoming things. They're not on TikTok. They're
yeah.
not on social media. And so they're struggling to find the certain correct words and don't want to offend anyone. So that's truly a great idea.
And I think the key, like, and the one thing I've learned through all of this, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so simple. Why didn't I think of it before? But how do you guys just know this stuff already? Is that instead of using the terms themselves, like talk about things in terms of the concept. So, a lot of people were like microaggression, and some people are like, what does that mean? I don't know. And instead of that, you talk about the actual concept. It's the concept of invalidating or making someone feel bad or unheard or unseen through the words or the actions you do. They may not be egregious, but there's something else. And so when you start talking to terms, you see people fighting a lot less about things, and then they understand like, oh, the concept is blah, blah. Oh, I'm on board with that, versus misunderstanding or misinterpreting a word that they think is something else. And then being willing to ask questions and always being willing to be humble. Like, I think I might get this wrong and I'm completely sorry, but I'm really trying to learn. Can you help me? And when you're willing to be humble, then it seems to work a lot better. People will forgive you for your gaffe because they know that you're trying, and then just don't keep making that mistake after you've asked. They'll go like, okay, I made the mistake. I'm going to keep doing it, right?
Right. You can't keep repeating it. Uh, yeah, that's great. I love that idea. And then just another question. Can you tell us a story or like about a specific time where when you finally decide to branch into this and really like kind of test diversity, use that in your own company where it specifically impacted someone?
um, well, I think the first time I wrote an article about this a while ago. My business partner and I were working at a digital company together, and our team was probably one of the most diverse teams I've ever worked on. And so my business partner is half Mexican and half Chinese. I'm clearly black. And then the rest of our team, like our 3 out of the 4 leadership positions on the team underneath us were women. So just that in and of itself was like a big deal for a lot of people, right? And then they were spanning the spectrum in terms of like religion. Like we had someone who was Jewish, someone who was agnostic, someone who was Catholic. We had Latina, we had someone who was half Chinese, half white. And so like it really became like this incredibly diverse group of people. And through that, what we saw was that at first the company gave us those people, like the first people who joined our team were kind of the dregs of the company. They're like, oh, nobody wants them in their departments. You guys could have them. And what we discovered is that a lot of the people on our team were actually amazing. They just hadn't been given the opportunity or afforded to work in the way that actually made them most successful. And since we were small and we were able to be more nimble, and honestly, titles didn't mean anything to us when we first started. There were five of us, and we were like, I don't care what the title is. Let's just do something. We were able to really build a business. So the we were given like $1,000 and told to come up with a new business unit, or at least a new content format for social media. We spent $600 of that thousand, and after that, didn't need the rest because we started making money on social media. So by like the first 9 months, we had made $1 million. Um, and so then suddenly we had this team that before nobody wanted getting all of this visibility, and everybody wanted to work with them, and then everybody wanted to be on our team. Actually, our company was sold, successfully acquired because of that. And so I think that was probably the first time where I realized that us doing what we knew was right and what worked was actually the way to go. And so after that company, my business partner and I started our own company to keep doing that and continue in that process.
Congrats. That's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I mean, it's definitely important. Just even in day to day, see how people work, see their different experiences and what they can bring to the table. So that's congrats. That's really awesome. I'm like at a loss for words. That's a great story. And then I think if there's any last takeaways that you had for other people who are looking to join in the social media market, if there's anything that you would suggest, let's say like young people like me who are in college who might not know what they're doing or just trying to figure it out, is there anything you would suggest?
Yeah, I think it's just don't ever stop learning. Like that's been the key. Like there are so many things are changing, even on social media. Like every algorithm is changing. There's always some new platform coming out, and don't be afraid to just learn it. And you may not use it, but learn, and don't be afraid to ask. Those two things will get you pretty far. Yeah, just keep asking and learning. I know so many people who are like, I'm done with school, I'm not going to learn anymore, and then they just stop. And those are the people who kind of stagnate and never actually grow. So
Just keep learning, keep reading new things.
yeah,
That's
and
great.
challenge yourself. I mean, it make yourself like get used to being uncomfortable. So like I starting a company was not comfortable. Like I it's scary, and I'm still kind of like this is adulting on a whole nother level, right? But
Just
um
another step to the stairs, another flight of stairs in a whole nother.
exactly, and I think about like, oh my God, I'm paying people to do work. This is scary. Like, what if I mess up? And then like there are people who don't get paid because of me, right? And so, um, but I think I'm slowly but surely kind of sinking into it. But it's actually incredibly rewarding too because I've had so many opportunities, and I realize that just because it's my company, it doesn't mean that I know everything. And so I've been able to learn from so many podcasting before last year. Like I had no idea what podcasting was. And then like the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020, we were like, hey, let's do a podcast. Sure. What is that like? Oh, let's try it. Right.
Right.
And now we have four. And yeah, so one of them we're animating. And so like it's just try it. And if you don't like it, you can just stop.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time. You've had a lot of great insight and a lot of great quotes, and really been an honor to talk to you. And thank you so much for talking with us. And I'd love to hear more and can't wait for your next podcast, radio show. I'll tune in.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, this was great. Hopefully we can connect again at some point soon. But I love
Def-
following you guys. So
Definitely. Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it from all of us from Balance. So
thanks.
thank you. Have a great
Bye.
bye.